India has emerged as the fastest growing fintech market and the third largest fintech ecosystem in the world. Today, we carry out complex financial actions like sending or receiving money, paying bills, buying goods and services, purchasing insurance, trading on stock markets, opening bank accounts and applying for personal loans online using smartphones without ever physically interfacing with a bank employee. India has the opportunity of a digital payments market of $1 trillion. The exciting, rapid, and transformational changes in financial services brought on by FinTech needs to be continuously monitored and evaluated so that regulators and society can keep up with the underlying technological flux. Regulators need to be creative, nimble, and tech-savvy with their approach. They will have to further expand their focus from entities to activities while also becoming experts in assessing the soundness and security of algorithms, which is easier said than done. Thus, for facilitating discussion and understanding that could be useful for policy and regulation purposes, this attempts to provide a brief review of FinTech laws and regulations encompassing their evolution, characteristics, and driving factors. In our next session, we are discussing India's evolving FinTech laws and regulations, and moderating these discussions is Alok Mittal, board member, Delhi-NCR and co-founder and chief executive officer, Indify Technologies, who is joined by Ashish Singhal, co-founder and chief executive officer, CoinSwitch, Dr. Ajay Garg, scientist F, director, Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, Government of India.
Welcome, Dr. Garg. Welcome, Ashish. Thanks for joining us on this panel. Technology is evolving, at a much faster pace than probably it has ever in the past. And with it, the business models are evolving equally fast. How does the role of the regulators change in keeping up with this pace? How to build agility and stakeholder connect? How do you think about this, Dr. Garg?
Thank you, Ashish. And let me thank the organizers for actually giving me a chance of sitting on a stage and doing a conference. This has been 18 months since I have been able to participate in a physical format, a hybrid model. Congratulations to the organizers for doing this. As you rightly said, that the technology evolving at a very fast pace. Absolutely, yes. Not only in the fintech sector, but in all other sectors. The world dynamics is also evolving at a very fast pace. The rules of the game are changing. There is a currency that is controlled by the central banks of various states. And there is a floating concept of a cryptocurrency that is challenging the currency market itself, which is central to any economic activity that happens in a nation and as part of a larger global ecosystem. So the challenges are great. The opportunities are greater. That we need to understand. The opportunities in the sense that how does the formal economy connects with the last person on ground? How does an inclusive growth happens? And that is what technology is actually bringing about. And that's what has been brought about. And India has showcased the world that how can technology change the life of people, change the way the governments function, and change that we come. When we came up with the UPI, which happened in a very short span with a particular challenge that came at that time, we never knew the power of platforms. And we never thought that India, with all its challenges, can actually make this happen to be the greatest innovation that can happen globally in the last 5 to 10 years. And that's what I feel. UPI has been the greatest innovation globally that has happened. The way it changed the world, the way it changed how things can happen financially, when it combines with our digital identity called the Aadhaar, and our fast evolving digital banking system, I feel many of the challenges that we have, whether it's related to microfinancing, whether it's related to people getting finance which are not on formal credit systems where they don't have a CIBIL score and all that, and they just have been paying their mobile bills regularly, and that can actually enable them to get a loan from a formal system. We have big names who are part of the wallet system, but they are not the players in India. That's the power which the government through these public digital platforms.
No, the power of the government, I don't argue against that. Ashish, just coming back to you on the first question that we were discussing around, what does this mean for regulators? And, we've seen fairly varying levels of consultation processes, openness of regulators to even respond to queries. What has been your experience in how regulators are connecting better with stakeholders and hence developing the agility that might be required?
Sure. Thanks, first of all, Mr. Mittal for inviting me and, Dr. Garg for the amazing answer. And I agree for most parts with Dr. Garg on, now the regulators are moving really fast in India and trying to create industries, trying to create innovation in that. But there are also segments where we could do a bit better, where we can, instead of, as a government entity, but also involve innovators as part of sandbox exercises and be ahead of the curve, right? And that's where I feel that, there is a gap, which India, obviously a digital first country today, would need to push a little more on, right? And government entities and innovators need to come together to work together on those innovations, be it AI, be it cryptocurrencies, be it blockchain, be it drones, be it any ecosystem of that kind, right? So we are still lagging behind a bit when it comes to the world in some of these areas. We are obviously way ahead in terms of identity, in terms of payment infrastructures, and combining these two together would create an environment where we would come out as leaders, not just in few of the fintech areas, but in most of the fintech areas, and create companies which are global in nature, rather than just becoming, local or just, India-based companies. We could create infrastructures which could be used across the world, not just in India.
What is the charter of the regulators, right? And in India, in many cases, regulators have a chart to promote growth of the industry. But you spoke about micro-lending. Interestingly, our regulator there does not have a charter for financial inclusion. Their explicit charter is financial stability. So, maybe there is merit in thinking about how do you gear regulators towards an explicit enabling goal rather than only an explicit controlling role.
It's me. So, Mittal sir, let me be candid on this. And time has shown that the regulators follow what happens in the industry, what happens with technology. You provide them a solution which can create disruption. And I am sure if there is an agile regulation system, it will follow and enable that. And no one thought about that an API ecosystem of a UPI can happen in a very, very restrictive financial sector of India, but it happened because there were a possibility that was shown through a platform called UPI. So on the micro-lending probe, inclusive and a disruptive solution around micro-lending, possibility exists. The fight by the innovation ecosystem, so that's the gap that we are actually seeing. And I'll actually, through this conference, will spur the fintech world to come out with solutions on micro-lending. That changes the life of the vendor sitting on the road, getting money at 6,000% around from the lending systems. That changes the life of the farmer, that he does not have to run around for very high priced lending, there are possibilities. We should not get bogged down with the old system where the micro lending systems failed in Andhra and many other places. So the legacy has to go, the will has to be there, and I assure you the regulations will follow.
No, absolutely. And I agree with you. I don't think we have had a disruptive innovation in micro lending. Now, having said that, and this is TransUnion data, more than 40% of the new to credit loans that were extended over the past few quarters were from FinTech companies, right? And this is against all the banking system that we've got there. So I'm sure we'll get there, but we need more disruptive solutions to make sure that we can move the needle on that count. Let me just move to another element of how to regulate. And classically, regulation globally has been more entity-based, right? So we have a NBFC entity that will regulate. We have an insurance entity that will regulate. Now, in the fintech world, there is a lot of unbundling of services and rebundling of services, right? The same provider wants to be able to offer payments and credit and insurance all within the ambit of the same application. There has been a growing trend towards more activity-based regulation rather than entity-based regulation. What are your views regarding that? And especially, with your understanding and background around the Aadhaar system, again, access to Aadhaar has gotten limited by entity-based principles rather than by activity-based principles.
Yes. The challenge with the fintech world is that there is a thin line of gap between possibilities and privacy. Traditionally, biometric systems or the iris data is considered to be highly secured private data. Privacy is part of the fundamental rights of every citizen, and government respects it and will respect it.
I buy that completely. The ironical part is that Aadhaar was perhaps the most secure system that was created. So privacy wasn't really the technical challenge.
The point is Aadhaar never actually challenged privacy, but understand what I said is that the moment a biometric or any iris comes into the picture, there will be a certain section of the society that will actually create, that will always challenge that as a privacy breach systems. In some case, you have a biometric, sovereign state has a biometric data of most of its citizens. It's the most secure system. Government does not have access to it. Government does not share that data with anyone. That's all a fact. And that's why we have actually allowed Aadhaar to exist, because if it not, there is an enabling act that controls it. Everything is in place. But yes, there will always be challenge in the fintech world between the data sharing and the possibilities with the fintech world will create. And that challenge is, when they come from time to time, the civil society, the government and the industry have to collectively come together, because the fintech has a possibility to actually touch on the bottom of the pyramid. And if we understand that basic, if Aadhaar would not have been there, in these 18 months, the social security benefits going to the remotest of the places in India would never have been possible. Think of what would have been the life of the people if these benefits would not have flowed when everything was closed down. And only our postman was there who delivering these benefits because of Aadhaar. Seamless delivery. Saved $24 billion in direct benefit transfers in the last 18 months. Possibilities exist. The will come and the change will happen. Privacy in a digital world will get a meaning globally with time when we see the benefits it brings to the society.
Ashish, when you look at the regulatory system, are there areas where this entity-based regulation starts to act as a deterrent for innovation?
So I do see it. I do agree 100% with what Dr. Garg had just said, that UPI and Aadhaar has just changed the way we connect and we, pass the benefits to the remotest of areas in India. But that also creates kind of, a dilemma where now companies who want to access Aadhaar in terms of identity, now it's very entity driven, right? It's not activity driven. So today, to give you an example, companies like us are not allowed to use those APIs to validate user authentication, right? Although following all the strictest regulations regarding, storage of Aadhaar and, maintaining virtual Aadhaar numbers and things like that, but we are still not allowed to access the identity directly or to validate the identity directly. And coming to the point of UPI, even though UPI is an amazing system and trying to build all banks, payment gateways, aggregators together, but still dictates to a lot extent who can use that infrastructure. The UPI regulation on say the fantasy league companies, right, not allowing transactions to happen less than 50 rupees. Now these may seem small to start with, but these will only grow. Now these centralized systems would start to put rules and regulations which favors them rather than which could be against certain industries altogether, right? So how do we build a fair system which is more entity plus activity driven rather than just making it choosing one winner and letting it run that way, right? So I think it has to be a mixed balance of both if you want to encourage innovation as well as restrict the access to making sure that the privacy, which obviously is the fundamental right of every citizen, is protected, but still giving a way for innovation to happen and not restricted by a single entity who decide what is innovation and what is not.
The other side effect of this obviously is, blocking innovation, right? So, for example, we have some 18 kinds of different NBFCs in India from a regulatory construct standpoint. And one NBFC can't do the activity that the other one can. So, for example, today combining an account aggregator with a peer-to-peer lender is not possible from a regulatory standpoint. And that starts to then complicate the structures that you have to imagine, right? So, and I think many times what FinTech is trying to do is to reimagine these boundaries. So that's the rationale for moving towards a more activity-based system. Actually, in the financial services, FSLRC had argued for that for a long time, but it seems that we are still following the old regulatory template.
Let me tell you, when you show them the opportunities that lie in opening up systems, and possibilities happen. I agree with you, regulators are conservative traditionally, but they are far less conservative today. They're ready to hear you out. When we talked about that the rupee capital ecosystem is the biggest challenge in the venture capital ecosystem that is there, which can hamper the growth of the India startup story and the economic benefits flowing into the local economy. When we discussed this, we thought of a fund that can actually change this. And when we discussed it with the RBI, Department of Economic Affairs, IRDA, and all other agencies, I'm happy to say that today, our insurance agencies, our pension funds, and others have a small possibility of investing a very small sum of money in venture capital. And that possibility does not impact their stability, but creates a huge possibility for our startups to get Indian capital.
Definitely. So, as far as...
my limited point was that when we showed them a way that there is an opportunity and a concern there, they came up with regulation. And I'm sure on two things. One, what Ashish talked about was entity-based, giving access to many. I think a lot of discussion is happening. Aadhaar has been a huge regulatory challenge for the system. And ways have to be brought about to create, because it has got endless possibilities. Aadhaar has endless possibilities. Aadhaar is a role model for the world to follow. UPI is a role model. UPI needs to flow out to all countries in the world. and that will make our fintech sector move with that. And so there is a global opportunity. There is a possibility, and we are really thinking how we take UPI to more countries. So possibilities exist.
Absolutely.
Challenges also exist. But when we two come together, we will solve it faster. That's what my limited knowledge.
No, absolutely.
And working in the system
you know, I've been in the angel investing ecosystem now for more than 15 years. And one of our core issues, 10 years back was that all of the risk capital was foreign capital, right? And it's just not as stable as domestic capital can be. And I think in the last 5 years, it's very heartening to see local funds, even before the pension money or the insurance money comes into play. SIDBI has played a role in enabling local LP capital. So certainly those are areas where progress has been made. One of our members in the audience, Bala, has a question about this issue that you raised on cybersecurity issues for fintechs. How are you thinking about those issues, and what are the other kind of elements that you are worried about from a big tech, big data innovation standpoint?
The time has come. Cybersecurity is central to most of the concerns which can actually that can challenge the disruption that can be caused by digital technologies. And that's one of the key issues. India needs to have more cyber emergency response, and which are sectoral in nature. Mm-hmm. We need to have a financial cert, and we are working towards it. We need to have many other forms of cert that will actually handle the challenges of cybersecurity. The second and the other important thing is that India should be the home for small cybersecurity solutions, which are actually plugged into small innovations, plugged into specific challenges which a specific entity might face on cybersecurity, and that's where, and so we have moved around challenges, a form where we throw these challenges to the innovators to solve, and the cybersecurity innovation ecosystem itself is evolving very fast in India.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But what are the other things that worry you about the tech innovation? And many players have gotten disproportionately large, right? So data security is one. You spoke a little bit about market dominance, competitive issues. On the e-commerce side, there has been a lot of evolution of the regulation regarding just conflict of interest and protecting the local industry. What would be the core 2 or 3 things that the regulators are worried about as, so to say, big tech businesses start to proliferate?
The biggest, one of the challenges is that India is fast emerging as small innovation hubs, which is actually not a platform-based ecosystem. So one of the challenges is that how do we actually remain part of the global ecosystem and at the same time provide ample opportunities for local innovation to happen. The two things, one on the regulatory side, you have to balance between the local needs and what the global agreements we have. That is one. The second is providing market access to innovation, whether in the government or whether in the MSME sector, traditional MSME sector, or whether in our large corporate industries, is still a huge challenge. If you talk about that domestic capital has to flow, which is important for Indian, at the same time, the domestic market also has to flow for our innovation to flourish. It cannot be that our Johos and Freshworks live on US markets. We have to create our internal local markets for these to actually remain more stable.
Understand. And how do you think about the balance with the local industry, right? Clearly, areas like e-commerce have an impact on the retail industry, merchants. At the same time, they also enable a lot of merchants to do what they could not do earlier. Similarly, if you look at the large gig worker economy, that has impact on how individuals get treated, contract workers versus full-time workers, benefits, those kind of issues. How are you thinking about balancing innovation with social security, if I may?
Look, for example, when COVID challenged the way we work in offices, the way SEZs actually mandated that all the employees have to work within boundaries. And we in 1 month enabled the SEZs to allow work from home. We created the biggest growth model of VPNs that can come, which has never been discussed in anywhere. Sure. We had an exponential growth on VPN accounts in this country, which was enabled by opening the plugs in the telecom sector. A huge innovation, a huge regulatory clearance that was given. With regard to the e-commerce, the balance between a proprietary platform and keeping the interest of the rider on that has to come from twofold, that you have to give possibilities of a challenge to these players, because I don't think there is an honesty that lies behind the operation of these intermediaries. If the intermediaries work purely as intermediaries and allow enablement of traders and players onto that platform, many of the problems could have been solved. But if intermediaries themselves act as traders, there is a challenge that lies, whether directly or indirectly, and I'm not saying who and why. So there is a challenge there, and it needs to be addressed, and there will be a civil society, and there will be something that will actually come and make it enable that there is an equal playing field for all to flourish on the, because e-commerce is an alternate to the traditional way we traded or did business, and that's a reality, and we have to come with a solution on that.
Understand. No, I think it's very interesting, right? Because in the startup world, in the big tech world, in the venture capital world, building moats is everything, right? Building defensibility, building dominant position is everything. And what you're saying is from a social good standpoint, leveling the playing field again and again is important, right? So there is that stress that will continue to exist between the corporate goals of building the moats and the social goal of flattening the moats so that other people can play. But Ashish, let me come to you on this. We've spoken a little bit about what regulators should be doing and are thinking of doing. But what Dr. Garg is really pointing us to is how the industry should behave, how the startup should behave, and what are the norms and responsibilities that we should take besides value creation that drives many of us. Would love to get your thoughts on it, on how you as an entrepreneur think about some of these issues.
Sure. No, I 100% agree with Dr. Garg. It can't be just about the business. It is about user protection at the heart of it, right? And what is right for your user. Sometimes company becomes so big, so monolithic that they control the market, and they who were supposed to be the middlemen between the sellers and buyers now create different rules, different playing fields where others cannot survive, and they now pick the players who survive, who do better, and whether it is right for the user or not, right? So there has to be the innovation. It needs to follow certain rules as well, right? That rules benefits both all the parties involved in the ecosystem and user at the center of it. Today, that user could be a seller. Today, that user could be the actual end user receiving a product. So I personally definitely believe in the same thesis as well, that as innovators, it's not just about building moats. It is also about how these moats help you deliver value to the users. So economy of scale definitely lies there, that when you become bigger, you can actually do things much more seamlessly, much more cost-effective way, which ultimately end up helping your users and the sellers. But you should never be in a position where you are creating those rules, what is right, what is wrong. There has to be a dialogue between both parties. There has to be rules and regulations in place which protects users against a giant, against a big a single player in the industry who is defining what that industry should be and what it should do for the user and what should it do for the business, right? So there definitely has to be, as an innovator, there has to be rules and regulations to be put in place which checks whether this direction is the correct direction, or there needs to be more improvement in the company to ultimately benefit the end user of the industry.
What do you expect from the innovators? All of us are citizens of this country. We want to create social good as much as we want to create wealth. What are your guiding
What I
principles?
expect from an innovator? I expect more disruption from the innovator. I expect that the innovator needs to connect to the local challenges, because I think the innovation is about solving problem on ground. And there can be no better storehouse for seeing problems than this country. So you need to solve local problems. You need to create value around those local problems, and the social good and economic good has to come together to create a socio-economic impact.
And Ashish, what do you expect from regulators? How would you like to engage? What is your dream regulator?
So I think a dream regulator, India, by the way, has done an amazing job. But what we need more is a clear channel of communication, right? How do we bring those ideas to government? How do we vet those ideas? How do we take their help in moving ahead with those ideas? So that process need to be more transparent, and it needs to be more open for both innovators as well as governments, right? Where we can sit on the same table, discuss about these things, and then maybe the idea is to start a sandbox and start innovating there, right? But there has to be a constant dialogue, and a clear path. Setting a clear path would definitely be the first step for this process to start.
Definitely.
Great. And on that note, thank you very much, Ashish. Thank you, Dr. Garg. This has been very energizing discussion for me personally. Every time I talk to people in the government, this notion of our responsibility towards the society just gets reinforced. So thank you for doing that. And thanks, Ashish, for bringing in the point of view of many of us entrepreneurs who are looking to interact more closely with regulators and make things happen. With that, we'll call the session to the close, and thanks to all of our audience, and thanks for your questions.
5 मिनट में अकाउंट सेटअप और ट्रेडिंग शुरू।
हाँ कर सकते हैं।
नहीं कर सकते।
लगी शर्त और हारा तो It's possible with CoinSwitch Kuber. Download करो और Bitcoin trading start करो. CoinSwitch Kuber. सिक्का चमकेगा.
Cryptocurrency is a non-regulated digital asset, not a legal tender and subject to market risks and price.
Where there is life, there is hope, there is meaning. But life has its downs as much as its ups. Life is about challenges. Life is about opportunities. Time for joy, time for celebration, and time to introspect. Thankfully, in every one of life's moments, and even beyond life itself, there's LIC. Where there is life, there's always LIC.